Uncovered family secrets lead to brutal massacre. True crime documentary. Hook. Is it possible to escape your family's darkest secrets? What happens when the truth is too horrifying to uncover? In this chilling tale, a woman uncovers a deadly web of lies, betrayal, and murder. But the most shocking revelation is yet to come. Stay with us till the end to discover the twisted secrets that will leave you breathless. You won't believe how this story ends. The house felt suffocating, the air thick with tension. A place that once echoed with laughter now stood silent. It was late. The shadows stretched long across the old wooden floor, each room colder than the last. Lena sat by the window, her fingers pressed against the glass. Her eyes followed the movement of the trees outside. But something wasn't right. She could feel it, the weight of it, a heaviness that settled in her chest. She turned her head, glancing down the hallway. A faint light flickered from under the door, the one at the end, her father's office, where he had always kept things locked away, things that should never be seen. Lena had heard rumors, whispers in the family, about debts, about enemies. She had never believed them, but now her instincts were screaming at her to leave, to run, but her feet wouldn't move. She was frozen. A sound, a low thud, then a crash. Lena stood up, heart racing. The hairs on her neck stood up. Another noise. This time, footsteps. Heavy, unhurried. Someone was coming. Not her father. Not her brother. The door opened slowly. Lena's breath caught in her throat. There, in the doorway, stood a figure. A man she didn't recognize, dressed in dark clothes, his face shadowed, his eyes locked onto hers. Lena. His voice was cold, low, familiar. Her stomach twisted. It wasn't possible. Dad, she whispered. The man smiled, but it wasn't her father's smile. It was cruel. Your father is gone, he said. Just like the rest of them. Lena's heart stopped. She backed away, but the man was already stepping closer, his eyes glinting in the dim light. The floor beneath her feet seemed to crack, and in that moment everything changed. The truth was unraveling. Family secrets, buried deep, were rising to the surface, and it was too late to escape. The door slammed shut behind her. She was trapped. Lena's pulse raced. She could feel the darkness closing in. What had they done? The room was closing in. Lena's breath came in sharp, shallow gasps. She pressed her back against the cold wall. The figure was coming closer. His footsteps echoed in the silence, each one growing louder, nearer. She tried to steady herself, but her hands shook. Her mind raced. What was happening? Why was he here? The man stopped just in front of her. His eyes never left hers. A twisted smile curled on his lips. Lena opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Her throat was dry, tight. You think you know the truth? He asked, his voice like ice. Lena nodded, barely able to breathe. Her heart thumped in her chest. Then you're already dead. Her world spun. What was he talking about? The man reached into his coat pocket. Lena's eyes widened. Was he carrying a weapon? The air felt colder now. The darkness in the room seemed to press down on her. She could feel her heart hammering against her ribs. He pulled out a small envelope. His fingers brushed the surface of it as he held it out. Your father's last words, he said, and your family's sins. Lena's mind raced. The words made no sense. Her father? Her family? Open it, the man said. His voice was thick with malice. She hesitated, but something in her gut told her she had no choice. Her trembling hands reached out. She took the envelope. The paper felt cold, slick. Lena ripped it open. Inside was a letter, written in her father's unmistakable handwriting. Her hands shook harder as she read the words. Her father's confession. He had been involved in something much darker than she ever imagined. The debts, the enemies, the lives destroyed. But it didn't end there. The last line of the letter made her blood run cold. "They're coming for you next." Lena's vision blurred. The words swam in front of her eyes. She could feel the weight of the letter in her hands. But it was the last line that haunted her. "They're coming for you next." A chill ran down her spine. Her breath caught in her throat. Who was coming? The man in front of her didn't speak. He just watched, his eyes cold, empty. Lena's mind raced. Her father had known this would happen. Had he left her to face it alone? The room felt tighter now. The walls seemed to close in around her. Lena glanced around for an escape, but there was none. The window was too far. The door locked. Her heart hammered in her chest. She felt the air grow thick, oppressive. A suffocating weight she couldn't shake. The man stepped closer. His breath smelled of cigarette smoke and decay. Lena's hand shot to her pocket. Her fingers brushed the handle of the small knife her father had once given her. He had said it was for protection. But protection from what? She gripped it tightly, pulling it from her pocket. Her fingers wrapped around the cold steel. "Do you think you can stop this?" The man sneered. He seemed almost amused. But Lena's fear had turned to something else. Anger. Desperation. She lunged. The knife caught the dim light as it sliced through the air. But the man was quicker. With a swift movement, he grabbed her wrist. The pain shot through her arm. But she didn't let go. "You don't know who you're dealing with," he hissed. His grip tightened. Lena struggled. Her breath came in short, frantic gasps. She couldn't think straight. All she could hear was the sound of her own heartbeat, deafening in her ears. The man's face twisted in fury. He pulled her closer, his breath hot against her skin. In that moment, she knew. Her father's secrets were darker than she had ever imagined, and she was about to become part of them. The pain was sharp, blinding. Lena's world tilted, her body crashing to the ground. The room spun around her as she gasped for air. Her brother's face loomed above her, his hands gripping her arms tightly. His eyes, once filled with warmth, now held only coldness. Lena tried to speak, but her throat tightened. Her chest was heavy, the air escaping her lungs with difficulty. "You had to know, didn't you?" Her brother's voice was eerily calm, devoid of emotion. The words echoed in the stillness. Lena's mind raced. She couldn't comprehend what was happening. Why was he doing this? Why had he become part of this nightmare? He leaned closer, his breath hot against her skin. "There were things your father never told you." His smile twisted into something dark, sinister. Lena's vision blurred, and for a moment, everything around her felt like a dream. But the reality was too harsh, too raw. The man, her brother, had become a stranger in front of her. This was not the person she had grown up with. This was someone twisted by the very secrets that had bound their family for years. Her heart pounded in her chest. The letter. Her father's confession. Her father had known something would happen. Had her brother been a part of it all along? Was he one of the enemies her father had mentioned? "Don't you see, Lena?" Her brother's voice was softer now, but still chilling. "You were always meant to be the last piece. The final sacrifice." Lena's breath hitched. The weight of his words crushed her. The realization settled in, cold and suffocating. Her father's debt, the dangerous world he had tried to protect her from, it had all been leading to this. To her. To this final, deadly moment. With the last of her strength, Lena shoved against her brother, managing to break free. She stumbled backward, her body trembling with pain. Her legs felt weak. Her vision swam. But she had to run. She had to escape. But there was nowhere to go. The door was blocked. Her brother was already moving toward her, his shadow swallowing the light. "You can't run, Lena," he said softly. Everything has already been set into motion. Lena's heart raced as the walls seemed to close in once again. The truth was too much to bear, and in that final, horrific moment, the last shred of hope slipped away. The room was still, too still. Lena's hands shook as she pushed herself off the floor, the weight of everything crashing down on her. Her brother's body lay motionless, the blood pooling around him. The smell of it was overwhelming, sharp, and metallic. She couldn't look at him anymore. She couldn't think about him as the brother she once knew. The house felt colder, darker now, like a tomb, like a place where things were never meant to leave. Lena stumbled toward the door, her legs unsteady, her body covered in the cold sweat of terror. She reached for the handle. It turned easily, almost mocking her. The door creaked open, and Lena stepped out into the hallway. The dim light of the house flickered as though it, too, had given up. The air outside the room felt different. Thick, oppressive. It pressed against her chest, like an invisible weight. Her thoughts spiraled, the horror of the night closing in around her. The secrets, the lies, her family's twisted past, stretching out before her. She walked down the dark hallway, each step slower, heavier. She needed to leave. She needed to escape this house. But the longer she stayed, the more the memories seemed to claw at her. The shadows in the hallway seemed to twist and shift. Lena turned quickly, half expecting to see another figure lurking in the dark. But there was no one, only the silence. Her heart pounded in her chest. Her mind was reeling, grasping for something to hold on to. She had to leave. But as she moved toward the door at the end of the hallway, something caught her eye. A small object on the floor, barely visible in the dim light. Lena knelt down, her body still trembling, and picked it up. It was an old, faded photograph. Her hand shook as she turned it over. On the back, the words were scrawled in her father's handwriting. "You're the last. You'll understand soon." Her heart stopped. The photo showed her family before it all fell apart. But behind the smiles, there was something darker, something hidden. A secret her father never wanted her to know. Lena's breath caught in her throat as the pieces fell into place. This wasn't just about her brother. This was bigger than her. She stood there in the dim light, the photograph trembling in her hands. The weight of her father's words pressed down on her. It wasn't over. It would never be over. Lena's hands clenched around the photo, the truth crashing over her like a wave. The family secrets had never truly died. They were just waiting for her to uncover them. The darkness in the house wasn't gone. It had only just begun. Lena's fingers clenched around the photograph as the realization settled deep in her bones. Her father's cryptic message echoed in her mind. "You're the last. You'll understand soon." What did it mean? Why had he left her with this? She stared down at the photograph, the faces of her family frozen in time. There, in the corner of the picture, was her brother, alive. But there was something off about it, something hidden. Her heart raced. The shadows in the house seemed to stretch, grow, and twist as if they were alive. Lena's thoughts spiraled. Could there be more to this? More to the past that her father had buried so deep? The air around her felt thick. Every step she took down the hallway felt heavier, like the house itself was pulling her back. She had to escape. She had to leave before the darkness consumed her too. But as she moved toward the door, she froze. A soft creak echoed through the silence, and Lena's breath caught. She wasn't alone. From the shadows, a figure emerged. Lena's heart skipped a beat. Her body went cold. It was him, her father. His eyes were hollow, his face gaunt and pale. He stepped toward her slowly, his movements stiff, unnatural. "Dad," she whispered, her voice barely a sound. Her father's lips twitched into a smile, but it was empty. It didn't reach his eyes. "You shouldn't have seen it," he said, his voice hollow. Lena recoiled, her stomach twisting. What do you mean? He stepped closer, the weight of his presence crushing her. You're the last one to find out. The last one to understand what we've done. The room grew colder, the shadows darker. Lena's pulse quickened as the truth unfolded. Her father, her brother, they had been part of something far darker than she could have ever imagined. Her father's words hit her like a ton of bricks. It was always meant to be this way. It's never been about survival. It's about legacy. Lena's breath caught in her throat. The family was cursed, and she was trapped in its web. Her eyes locked onto her father's, and in that moment, she realized there was no escape. The past would always catch up, and now it was hers to carry forever. Her father's figure loomed closer, his smile deepening. Lena closed her eyes, feeling the weight of everything crash over her. Lena's body trembled, the coldness of the room seeping into her bones. Her father's figure stood before her, haunting, his eyes devoid of warmth. The truth hung heavy between them, suffocating, pressing down on her chest with every breath. You don't have to understand, her father whispered, his voice barely a rasp, but you will in time. Lena felt the weight of those words settle into her heart, deep and irreversible. She had spent her life trying to uncover the pieces, the mystery of the family that had once been whole. But now, the truth felt like a burden she couldn't shake. Her father's pale face loomed over her, his presence both chilling and familiar. The house itself seemed to close in, its walls a silent witness to years of secrets, of pain, of betrayal. Lena closed her eyes, the room spinning, the weight of everything crashing down around her. She thought of the man her brother had become, of the blood they had spilled together, and of her father's legacy, one built on lies, debts, and darkness. You were always meant to be part of this, her father continued, his voice soft but final. Now you understand. You carry it forward. Lena's breath hitched. There was no escaping it. The secrets, the blood, the past. Her heart beat slowly, the heaviness of it all making each pulse feel like an eternity. And then she realized something. The house wasn't just a place of memories, it was a prison. A prison built by her family, for her family, trapping them in the same cycle of darkness. But Lena had a choice. She could let the darkness consume her, become just another lost soul in the legacy of her family. Or she could step away, her eyes opened, meeting her father's cold gaze one last time. With a shaky breath, Lena turned, stepping toward the door. She didn't look back, and with that, she walked into the unknown, leaving the house, the secrets, and the past behind. The darkness would always follow, but for the first time in her life, she was free.